There you go.
Hey everybody, it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and this is Saturday, November 8th. We've got a special guest, Sascha Fast, who's going to be telling us about atomic notes. It's been a busy week at Eastgate, doing lots of work with parabolic view and also a lot of work on localizations. So, uh, some interesting things are coming down the pike. If you want to get started even earlier, uh, keep in mind the Tinderbox Backstage program. I'll put that link in the comments. But without further delay, here's Michael.
Hey, everybody. So welcome to our November 8th meetup. Typically, the way our meetups work is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. I think Les is new. I don't remember seeing Les before. Hi, Les. Great to see you. And Kathy's new too, or Bob. We're curious as to which one we've got, Kathy or Bob, or both. So we go around the room. People introduce themselves if they so want, and they can kind of share with us what they're doing with note taking and their thoughts around tools for thought. We then will jump into any projects that our people are working on, and if we have a theme, we jump right into our theme. And we're excited today, as Mark had pointed out, we have Sascha Foss today from Zettelkasten.de as our guest speaker today, and he's just put recently some new concepts and around this idea of atomic note taking. And Sascha is the founder of Zettelkasten.de and a series of tools that help you develop the Zettelkasten concept. So Sascha, not to steal your thunder, maybe you can, as part of your introduction, you can talk a little bit about Lumen and Zettelkasten and the history and how we got here and really kind of set the stage and what brought you to your new atomic note-taking ideas that you'll be sharing with us today. And so with that in mind, without further ado, take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you. So thanks for having me. So the general introduction to the Zettelkasten method is it's an age-old tool. So it's you can trace it back, I think, even to the antique ages of the ancient Greek. But there was one guy. So basically, Zettelkasten is a slipbox. So it's an organizational tool, or was an organization tool for your notes, for your ideas. In old ages, mostly quotes, and then your own ideas. And Luhmann was a sociologist who gave the Zettelkasten a pretty unique spin. So he basically created what is known in the English world, in German, in the German world also, the Folgezettel, which basically means that you, instead of having categories for your notes that you organize, you have something like an organically grown system. So let's pretend that you start your Zettelkasten, and it's a physical Zettelkasten. You start with a number 1, then next one would be number 2, and now you want to expand or comment on node number 1. So now you will give it the number, let's say 1.1, and then you obviously file it like right after that. So then you expand, and then whenever you comment on some node, you file it behind that. So it's basically a big tree structure. And this enabled him in his analog Zettelkasten to develop a web. So today, this is like pretty normal, I would say. Wikis, or especially Tinderbox, or any kind of like linked system takes that for granted. But having this in a physical system, I think, was pretty revolutionary. And he used the Zettelkasten in a very specific way. So what we have today is like pretty far removed from how Luhmann used his Zettelkasten. So if you're interested, I can dive into the difference between Luhmann's original use of the Zettelkasten and how it's used typically in modern ages. But I think for now, I will skip that because it's a rather technical note. And what on my first contact with the Zettelkasten method was me trying or wanting to become a professor of philosophy. And I thought, okay, I need to organize myself because knowledge is the raw material and I need to have like a good storage. And quickly I discovered that the Zettelkasten method is more like a framework in which you start to think. So I really like the term integrated thinking environment. And it has like a couple of layers, and my favorite image for that is the iceberg. So typically you start learning about let's say the new wave of note taking. That I think it started like 2018, 2019, or at least then it got popular. Under the umbrella of like linked notes. So links were all the craze. And the next level, according to the or like of the Zettelkasten iceberg, is then you learn about the Zettelkasten.
Quiet.
So you you know there's a Zettelkasten, you know about the terms, and you identify the Zettelkasten typically with some workflow. So like the one like now most popular or most known workflow is this kind of like fleeting note, literature notes, and permanent notes. So there's no magic to it. So fleeting notes are just jotted down notes on the fly. Literature notes are just notes that you take while reading, and permanent notes are the stuff that ends in the Zettelkasten. The next layer of depth is when you go to more general principles of the Zettelkasten method. So the numbering system, for example, is not needed in a digital world, because the whole reason to assign these numbers is to have a unique address. But you can use any means. So what we use is a timestamp. So it's year, month, day, hour, and minute, and this is then enough. And so this stamp will never change. It's the unique address. It never repeats, and now you refer just to the point in time, and then you have a stable connection. But if you use dedicated software that takes care of the link, then you can just go by direct links, and it also works. So the third layer is more thinking about the principles that are behind the Zettelkasten method. Having arrived there, there's a fourth layer, and the fourth layer, I think, is where perhaps it sounds a little bit like marketing speech when I say the Zettelkasten magic, but it's not exclusively Zettelkasten magic. It's general magic, and the Zettelkasten perhaps can give you a door into it. So what do I mean by that? So the fourth layer is to merge thinking practices with your note-taking practice. And this is where, let's say, which is kind of like the goal of the complete guide of atomic note-taking. So the title is consciously chosen. So atomic note-taking is not the entire Zettelkasten method. It's just one component. And to be honest, it's not even mandatory. So you can have a Zettelkasten that is not purely atomic. So having said that, so atomic notes or atomicity means that you aim for one note, one idea per note. This is the whole shtick. But what does it mean? So if you aim to have one idea per note, then the task is to get to the essence of the idea. Because if you want to have exactly one note, you need to make sure that there's no redundant stuff on there, but you need to make sure that the idea is complete. So for that, I use, for example, a 6-item knowledge inventory. Oh, I screwed that up. So I have 6 items in my knowledge inventory. It's concepts, arguments, counter-arguments, models, hypotheses or theories, and empirical observations. And each building block has now a formal or has parts that you can identify. And now, if you identified all the parts, then you have like a formal reason to assume that you captured the whole idea. So, for example, if you want to capture an argument, you need the premises, the conclusion, and the logical form. And this is exactly the argument. If you want to capture an empirical observation, you need to capture the result of the observation and the method of observation. So for example, if you process a study, and let's assume it's a very focused study, you have a result. So let's say, like from my own work as a trainer, let's say you have a study in which there's an intervention, and the result is 10% increase in VO2 max. So the method is then split into participants, participant description, intervention, and all this kind of stuff. So the method by which the empirical study was conducted. So if you then process notes or process ideas, atomic notes means that you make it a habit to get to the essence of ideas. And I think it's a pretty it's a no-brainer that this is a good idea. Obviously, you can't do it with everything, so you need to be conscious of for which ideas you go deep into. But if you never do it, then you never get to the essence of ideas. So this is the whole reason why I wrote the complete guide, because I felt that there was way too less rigor with the idea of atomic notes or atomicity, because what you read out there was always just the kind of like the repetition. Yes, just put one idea on the note, but nobody defined what an idea is. So for me, it was kind of like strange, especially because people seem to have difficulties to make it work, and still it got promoted as this kind of like a strange nebulous thing with one idea per note. And the building blocks is my answer to the formalization, and then it's pretty clear what an atomic note means. It doesn't mean that each note has to be purely and exactly atomic, and if it's not, then the whole system breaks down. But at least there's a method. There's a method to it. And this one slice, let's say, this one thread of taking notes and aiming for atomicity, meaning getting to the essence of ideas, therefore making a web of ideas possible. Because now the links between nodes are not just links between nodes, but they map perfectly or almost perfectly to connections between ideas. So the action that you are taking is more akin to thinking when you take atomic notes. And now this could be generalized. I think this is, or to me, this is like a something like the white area on the map. It's something that has to be explored, because when we think about the modern age, I think there's one major force now that can't be ignored. So obviously it's AI. AI is basically a very powerful feature similar to a feature in an app. Few people know exactly what they can use it for, so it gets tested, but it seems to be the consensus that AI has great power, and now the task is to find a good task for it. But the other side, I think, is to develop a good private practice. So AI is about automation. So there is a good link, so I might send it or post it in the comments about the connection between AI and the left hemisphere. And I skimmed the article, but it looks good, very good, and it also cites one of my favorite books, The Master and His Emissary by Stuart McGilchrist. So AI, I think, is inevitable, but I think it's also inevitable to develop a personal deep knowledge practice. So I imagine a deep knowledge practice, like many knowledge workers already do it. So if you are a professor for philosophy, engineer, if you work with knowledge, you have some form of practice. But I imagine a deep knowledge work practice as something more like athletic training. So you pick the content not because of your immediate tasks, but you pick the content of your processing practice because of the needs that your mind has. So for me, for example, it's to give you an example, so I have 2 hours first thing in the morning because I wake up really early, and I have 2 hours not to spare, but it fits perfectly here. And here I process currently a book that is the title is Groundwork of Argumentation Theory, for example, because I think argumentation is very crucial. And I think it's crucial because an argument is a logical device to move the truth of some statements or some claims to another. So basically, argumentation theory is the field in which you study the transportation of truth. And I think it's pretty crucial to learn it, or at least it's very powerful. Yeah, so this is my idea of atomic note-taking. So atomic note-taking is one of the links that merges note-taking with thinking practices.
All right, so like tons and tons of questions. So one, do you have any visuals that you can share with us on this so that we can kind of, for those that are more visual learners and want to see that flow or process, that would be great. Do you have a list of suggested tools and methods? Be interested, and I know you've built your own, so feel free to share that as well. So that would be great to see that. And then from there, I'm going to have several other comments or questions for you, but I think it would be, let's just start with that.
So what do you mean exactly by visuals? You mean how to take an atomic note?
Yeah, how to take an atomic note, but also you talked about several frameworks, like this idea of, because the general conversation was great and it went fast, but I think at the same time, if you could, I don't want to call it PowerPoint slide, but like, talk about like, here are the different approaches we take to thinking, such as if you're looking, what did you call it? A research observation versus a premise observation. Maybe you can reinforce some of those things so that sometimes some people can visually see things better for that knowledge that you were trying to share to get locked in versus the verbal aspect of it.
So let's see.
And worst case, maybe just pull up your Zettelkasten app and type it in just so we can actually see it, so that visual can anchor with the words that you're saying.
Yeah, so wait a second. Then I need to switch archives because my Zettelkasten is in German. This wouldn't be really helpful. Oh no.
And then while you're pulling that up, I'll ask a third question because you introduced this. I mean, the world's all the rage on AI right now. And yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on the best way in your mind to leverage and use it and its risks, such as, I'll just express one of my opinions around it, which is generally accepted, is, AI is just destroying our critical thinking. And yet if we use it appropriately, it could really save a lot of time. It could directionally help open up doors for us. It can actually, if you use it right, it can do the opposite. It can help you with your critical thinking, but if you're really super lazy, it can destroy it. And so how do you use it? How would you suggest doing that?
Yeah, so AI
So just the three questions. You don't have to answer them in that order, but however you want to answer those three.
No. I will just use the reverse order. So I personally try to avoid almost any AI usage that does things for me, because I don't see any point. So first of all, I think AI is still very dumb. So whenever I talk to AI about problems that I have, AI doesn't help me. So either it's in philosophy, so when it comes to like ethical reasoning, when I in sports or in sport and fitness, so I'm a coach, it also doesn't like solve anything. So it basically just like spits out things that are almost right, but therefore they are completely wrong. So this is how I would describe it. I mean, the typical use case, or I would say the nature of AI is perfectly seen if you ask AI to perform a task in which it needs to be 100% right. So the most funniest example was, I think, create like series of pictures of all US presidents or something like that. And up until I think the 22nd century or something like that. So there was like Margaret Thatcher, but an image of Margaret Thatcher, but the name of Donald Trump or something like that was in the 80s. So it kind of like mixes, and it just looks like a somewhat fitting answer, but it gets the actual content like super wrong. And then the funny thing was in the 22nd century, there was a cyborg was the president. So I think this like encapsulates completely the problem of AI. So what I use AI for is to sometimes to unfold a pattern. So an example is that I just test an hypothesis and see if AI will what AI will say in general about that. So for example, there is a cardio machine that is basically like a spinning bike, but also has handles, so you crank on them. And I had an idea that I could use research from cross-country skiing to infer the specific traits of this machine, because I think this machine is superior to like quite a lot of other machines for specific training experiences. So I just asked the AI for the similarity of patterns, and then I confirmed it, and then I moved forward. So this was a very low level case, but the majority of usage by me is just as a research tool. So I give it a very specific prompt for research. So I say the domain, or I call I prompted the domain, the type of output. So it should be a table, like specific columns and stuff like that. And then it spits me out, for example, a table of specific reviews on some topic I'm doing research, stuff like that. Other than that, I think AI it actually can't provide you anything. And the problem actually is if you are not able to answer what you ask AI, you can make sure that the answer is correct. So the problem, or to highlight the problem, so imagine you don't know anything about health and fitness. So you say, you prompt the AI to generate you a weekly schedule for longevity. So how do you know the schedule is good or not? So you go more into details, and the result will be that you can't even make your mind about the details. You don't know how to ask the question, nothing. You don't know enough. So you can only evaluate the answer of AI if you ask it something, if you have a good enough level of expertise in the field that you're asking. And I guess this is the limits of AI. So it's only good if you are yourself good in the specific domain, and it doesn't help you if you have no clue about what you're asking. So it doesn't help. And especially in critical thinking, let's say, I think quite many people have no education in critical thinking. So when you try to critically evaluate a position and you don't know a lot about critical thinking, then the output doesn't give you anything. So yeah, if I would point you to the affirmation of the antecedents, for example, this doesn't tell a lot or doesn't, many people wouldn't know what this is, but if you know a little bit about formal logic, then you know, oh, this might be a problem. Yeah, so this is my take on AI. So the tools for atomic note taking is, or you can use any tool that allows you to create individual nodes or knots and connections between them. So obviously Tinderbox is perfect for it. I use the archive. The archive is our own app which is more like a distraction-free editor, so very minimalistic in its features. And I will pull it up to type in as requested the knowledge items. So I will share my screen if I have permission. So here it is. So as you see, so there are 6. The first one is the concept of concept. So here if you have the definiens and the definiendum. So the thing that does the defining and the thing gets defined. Atomic note taking is so this is pretty simple. This is the definiens, and this is the definiendum. So the thing that is defined is atomic note taking, and this is the definition. So pretty straightforward. Then you have argument, and there you have premises. Premises. So I don't know how to type out this this term. I think that's the defining. So statement, sources of truth. Conclusion is the statement aimed to be made true, and the logical form is the linguistic structure of truth transportation. So an example is premise 1, atomic note taking. Let's go by classic. All humans are mortal. Socrates is immortal. Therefore, this is wrong. So Socrates is mortal.
So here's my question as I'm watching you do this. How do we make the distinction between an atomic note, aka note that is a single idea, and a structured argument to which you're making now? Because I see, like, what I'm seeing here now, I'm seeing several ideas in a single note, aka a card or this item. So, as you're doing your work, what's that distinction between that atomic note that is your archive of ideas or sources and the note that is the collection of the arguments?
So this, for example, this would be an atom. So the problem, or the problem that I see is that, or it might. So this is one argument, and I define it as one building block because it's the correct resolution of ideas. So the problem with the English term idea is that it's a pretty broad term. So you will say, for example, that humans are mortal could be called one idea. And to me, it's not on the level of the idea, because I aim or I call ideas knowledge building blocks. So the things that you actually, or the building blocks that you're actually using to do something. typically statements are not used to build, let's say, more complex or complex knowledge. So this is just one building block. So I hope I answer your question somewhat. So this would be one node, and this would be one node. And if you, for example, let's say, create a connection, and that a connection would be the illusion of an idea. So let's pretend, or perhaps just make it practical.
Okay, so you're creating a some form of link now with this process?
Yeah. So I created the link first. I create the node second. And this would be the this would be the atomic node. It's a very minimal node. So typically a node can be longer. So what I also can send you, I have a demonstration of it, or I don't need to send you. So in the article, the guide to atomic node taking, I have a video demonstration of how it actually works in practice. So what does it mean to create nodes, then making sure that it's atomic, or to use heuristics to make it atomic, and then making sure that the nodes are atomic. There's even like an orientation map, so kind of like how the links then form and stuff like that. So if you want to have to look at a real world example. So it should be, oh, I can't see it. Yeah, it's right in the like completely in the bottom of the complete atomic node taking guide. So it comes. I mean, the inventory of knowledge building blocks is not. It's not formally proven. So it's not that I can give you like a formal argument that this is indeed complete and sufficient. Also, it's rather it's pretty stable, this inventory of so it's stable for now like 12 years or something like that. And I didn't need to modify it, even though I coached chemical engineers and professors of all kinds of, like, from philosophy to physics, stuff like that. So it's basically a scaffolding for or a general model of what types of knowledge are present. Did I answer the question somewhat?
A little bit for me. Anybody else want to comment? Jump in? Chuck, David, Mary, Melvin? Dave Rogers, you were coming off of mute. Did you have a question or comment?
That I'm looking forward to seeing the 6 elements that I want to continue with that.
Okay.
So this would be an example of a counter argument. I mean, it's a little bit silly, but I think you get my point. So the difference, I mean, it might sound a little bit overly formal to distinguish between arguments and counter arguments, but the difference is, the difference is pretty impactful, because typically you encounter, like, when people argue, they just argue for their positions, but often don't engage with the positions with the position of the other person. So if I, for example, let's assume me and my wife have an argument about what to eat, and I say spaghetti is the best, and I give like 10 awesome reasons. So it's super tasty, and we didn't have it for a long time, and so on and so forth. And she says no, but we think steak is better. And then she gives 10 more reasons. So we basically like build stronger and stronger positions, but we never interact with each other. But if she, for example, would engage with my arguments and say, you said we had it didn't have spaghetti for a long time, but actually we had it yesterday. So this would be actually engaging with my position and disrupting basically the truth flow from my premises and to the conclusion that I want to actually make. And it is often or quite surprisingly often the problem of many arguments. It's the problem of arguments between, let's say, vegan and meat eaters and all kind. It's just people argue for their side or for their position, but never truly engage with the position of the other side. And counter arguments, counterintuitively, are a way of engaging with the other position, like generally engaging with the position of the other side, and therefore it's actually more, I would say, more perhaps intimate, or more like you get more into contact with the other person if you make proper counter arguments. And I think it's often at the bottom or the root cause of not feeling that the other person takes you seriously, because the other person just engages with their own position. So models have a whole, entities, and relation. So a more graphical graphic thing would be nice. So perhaps I can find it. We have, let's see. I will trick my system. I need an image. So hopefully I can do it like this. No. So because I chose another archive, I don't have my images available. So it's in German. Yeah, but this would be an example of a model. So it's a flow. It's just flow by Csikszentmihalyi, and each of the elements, or it has elements or entities, I would say, and they are related to each other. So in here, capabilities and the requirements of your task are related to each other in an orthogonal way. And this creates then this map, and here you can have spaces. So this would be my description of flow, for example. And this is my extended flow model, because I needed to have like boundary zones, because I think the problem of the Csikszentmihalyi's flow model is that it's binary, so either flow or not flow. And I think there is a pretty interesting experience when you are just like too much or too taxed to get into flow. So this would be more the realm of deliberate practice. And right below flow, where you can get into flow, but you have to force yourself into flow, which would be more something like meditation. So this is actually part of my work and part of my stuff that I use as a trainer to people like meditate, or even engage in more intense training than the typical fitness stuff. So Then you have hypotheses or theories, and this is just a statement about how reality actually is. So an example of a theory is for example, what would be an actually theory? The salt bike is a superior cardio machine, for example. So it's merely just a claim here. And typically, when you have an hypothesis, you would have something in the backdrop. So you can have a justification for that. So this is reasonable since it has little impact and uses more muscle groups than other machines, for example. So theories basically, or in this framework, theories have hypotheses. They have also prescribed methods of observations. So a theory is a whole package, and obviously, I mean a scientific theory, but I think it's a good framework to think about this. And then we have lastly empirical observations. And empirical observation is first the method of observation, and second the result of the observation. And examples, so an everyday example is it rains, I looked out of the window. So this is the observation, and this is the method of the observation. So a faulty observation would be, for example, I know that it rains because I hear the rain, and in reality, it's just the neighbor, like just watering the field, or old rain, like drops from the tree, something like that. But it can also be just a scientific thing, observation, meaning you have the result of a study, and then you have the methods, how the study was conducted, and then it gets more, let's say, interesting. But these are the six items or types of knowledge building blocks that I use.
Nice. Dave, did that help?
So an atomic note, I think I Mark put a link to your website in the chat, and I went there and I gathered that an atomic note would only contain one of those building blocks at a time, but those building blocks would be related to some other idea, presumably, some other. Is there an overarching term for what the thing is that the building blocks are being used to either test or support or illuminate? Do you follow me? I mean, presumably none of these notes exist in a vacuum. They are related to one another for some larger, I guess, element of knowledge. And do you have a term of art in your concept here that describes what each of those notes serves, that overarching?
So no. But the reason why I don't have a term is I think it's, or perhaps it would be just knowledge. So these are the building blocks of knowledge. Or perhaps it would, perhaps I can answer the question by describing what I think knowledge is. So I come from a very naive position of defining knowledge, meaning typically you have a very nebulous definitions of knowledge in contrast to information and data. So this is kind of like the typical thing. So you have knowledge is integrated, or and I don't know what. I think it's much simpler, or at least I think it's much more actionable if you think much simpler about the difference between knowledge and information. Namely, we have an instinct or an intuition that knowledge is somehow more valuable than information. So we also have often phrases like mere info. This is just mere information. I want knowledge, something like that. And I asked what are the actual values of knowledge, or the specific traits that makes knowledge valuable. And to me, these are four. So it's reliability, it's relevance, it's utility or usefulness, and beauty. So when we talk about knowledge, we want to create specific values, meaning reliability. So here you can see it like really straightforward. So an argument is a structure that creates reliability of our opinion. So if you have an opinion, let's say you say, no, I only controversial examples come to mind. Let's say perhaps German Shepherds are the best dogs. So now you can provide arguments for that, but also empirical evidence. So and empirical evidence can also use to strengthen premises. So if we go, let's say, really practical, let's say this would be linked here. So let's assume we want to argue for this. German Shepherds are the best breeds. So this is my position, and my position might be, let's say, developed by or supported by one argument. So let's say the best breed is the smartest breed. German Shepherds are the smartest breed. Therefore, German Shepherds are the best breeds. So now, this, for example, is an empirical statement. So we would go and find empirical evidence. So this would be, I don't know, let's say Hans Werner conducted a study in German about the dog breeds. German Shepherds are the smartest. I think it's factually incorrect, by the way. So I think Border Collies are the smartest. So here you see, strictly speaking, two building blocks. So you have this is an empirical observation, and this is the argument. So when it would be a true example of my note taking, I would create an extra note. It would look like, for example, this. So Hans Werner is the researcher. So here I would obviously like write more about the study and stuff like that. So this note would be, or the goal of this note would be to capture the empirical, the result of the experiment and the method. And this would be then one empirical evidence. And in that case, the study should be very simple, because a lot of times a study, or rather a research paper, has a lot more building blocks than just one. And then it would look like this. See, Werner. And then I could add more empirical evidence here. So as you can see, the building blocks, they interlock. So if you, for example, create a model, then you can formulate arguments for the soundness of the model. Or you, a model, for example, also assumes certain states of reality. So a model typically.
Pause 1 moment there. The key word you just said is assume. You make an assertion at the opening of this element that the best breed is the smartest breed. What are the assumptions that go into that assertion? What is that is a whole other uh, portion of this element that needs to be broken down to, substantiate the statement that it is the best breed. Why isn't the best breed the one that's the longest lived, or the one that has the fewest health defects, or what is the basis for saying the best breed is the smartest breed? And that's just an example. I mean, we're not going to try and define, who the best dog is, but I mean, if you are pursuing this flow, that every element of it bears examination and um, substantiation of some kind. And I wonder, I mean, we talked about you mentioned the difference between information and knowledge and which has more value. And that raises the question of what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? You often hear the joke that an economist may know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Those are two different forms of knowledge that at face value appear related, but talk about totally different things. But you make decisions in one domain based on a an aphorism from a totally different domain that may not have any relevance. So yet there are domains of knowledge, and then there are. I like the empirical evidence piece that we definitely need that because that's what's often most sorely lacking. We can't be everywhere, see everything, and we have a tendency to cherry pick our empirical evidence. But how do we challenge that in your process? How do we know that we have the best evidence? Um, so I'm just throwing things out. I should shut up.
No. So what you see here is actually an age-old philosophical problem. It's called the problem of infinite regress, because you can always like go back and ask, okay, or qualify each statement. So I can then here provide an argument why this is true, and this can be broken down and broken down and broken down, and it will regress to infinity. And typically you solve this by either providing empirical evidence or by just elevating like not an arbitrary statement, but a statement to an axiom. And then you sound a little bit more sophisticated if you say, okay, these are my axiom, instead of just start here. The empirical observation, or this is not this framework doesn't give you the method of testing your empirical observation, but this is it's more in German we would say scientific thinking, so this would be direct translation, but I think in English or in American English it's more scientific method or critical thinking. So with empirical observation there are three directions. So you can seek out other empirical observations and see if they confirm or refute. You can go and test the way on how the empirical observation is made. So, for example, if hopefully my wife doesn't hear me. So if we lie in bed and my wife immediately says, "Oh, it's cold outside," and I say, "How do you know?" And she says, "I have a gut instinct." Then I would say, okay, it's not a very good empirical observation on which she bases her opinion on that, for example. So testing the method is the other direction. And then the last direction is seeing or inferring implications. So this is how you grow your own body of empirical observation according to position. So you build an empirical position. So in practice, it would be, let's say you work on this for some reason, then this would be the part in which you do your empirical work. Meaning, You have one study, but one study is not enough. So you search out, let's say, a systematic review because it gives you more access. Then you cross-reference the individual cited study in the systematic review to make sure that, at least by example, that you can trust the systematic review, because very often there are also not mistakes, but research, as we are all, are biased, and you need to take into this into account. Then you make implications. So this obviously would be an immediate implication, but you also would ask, okay, is it actually a good question, for example? So you can grow in every direction, but it's not, or the building blocks are more, once it's a framework through which you can see the individual parts of knowledge. So once you got that down, then you can kind of like slice and dice sources that you are processing. So then you can see, this is a model, and here's the supporting evidence for basic assumptions of the model, and this is the basic hypothesis and stuff. And then you can see the elements, and then you can structure knowledge like fairly quickly and simply. Did I answer like somewhat your concern?
Somewhat. I worry that we focus on process and put our faith in process and imbue in the process outcome a value that is not necessarily intrinsic, that bears no relation to the real truth. I would pick an argument that the Supreme Court of the United States, looks at the law and calls balls and strikes, and they've looked at the American Constitution and 220 years of whatever of American history and decided that the president of the United States is not accountable to the law. That may be true within that specific legal domain. I don't happen to think it is, but perhaps it is. In any case, is it wise? So I think there's information, there's knowledge, there's wisdom. I think part of those distinctions deal with the domains and the empirical effects of using one point of view, you either using just information to support opinion, or just and a process an appeals process and so on, and then saying this is now the law of the land. I think we lose our way when we focus on process and put faith in the process and don't look at the bigger picture, which is some other overarching domain, which I don't see reflected in a lot of these types of things. But
So I think this problem is quite straightforward to solve, because wisdom here, and I'm not claiming that what I'm saying is all there is to wisdom, but the specific aspect of wisdom is here the ability to choose the proper framework. Because if I pick your example, so I hope it's not a true example that the Supreme Court says that your president is not subject to the law.
very true.
It's what is crazy. So the proper framework now is, yes, it might be according to the law, but law is not the proper framework to make the judgment, because here it's about ethics. So the Supreme Court might come to the conclusion of, okay, this is actually how the law works out, and here it is. But then you need to take a step back and see the craziness of it. At least I would say that is crazy. So my humble opinion that this sounds crazy. But like on the level of knowledge, this would be you take a step back and ask yourself, for example, in that case, you would challenge the method by which the conclusion was made. So you would take a step back and say the Supreme Court came to this conclusion using this and this method. And then you say, this is not an appropriate method of coming to this conclusion because, and then you make a case why this is an ethical problem and not a legal problem. And therefore, the legal toolkit is not able to solve this problem. And this would be an act of argumentation. So it's still within the framework of knowledge. So I have a strong claim. My strong claim is that these building blocks are sufficiently able to map all there is to knowledge. I mean, it's a very strong claim, but for 12 years, the building blocks hold their ground.
Well, I find it fascinating. I liked one of the things that you mentioned was reliability, that I had a similar sort of exercise about 20 years ago in trying to, how do we discern what the truth is? And because there are infinite number of individuals and everybody has a different perception, that it's difficult for, to arrive at a singular view of the truth. And but one of the elements of the truth is that it is reliable. That if a statement is true, then number one, there will be most of the accounts will coalesce around that. Most of the time, that result will obtain when that process happens. But reliability is I think, reliability is a key element of the truth. That's yeah. But that's an important element, and I was happy to hear you mention that.
Yeah, reliability. As you can see, so I think we move beyond mere note taking already, and we now are in the realm of the philosophy of knowledge, rather with a practical application in mind, because it's philosophy in general, and also a philosophy of knowledge often gets really theoretical and not, let's say, really relevant to the elements of knowledge or the type of knowledge that we're dealing with. But the question of reliability is perhaps at the heart of the philosophy of knowledge, because the leading question of philosophy of knowledge is, how do we know that we know something? And I had quite some fights back in university, because to me, a lot of this academic fiddling with this question is pointless, because all people that question specific statements or beliefs are inconsistent. So nobody, you are not truly being skeptic about the reality of the chair you are sitting on, because you are sitting on and you're perfectly trusting that it doesn't from one moment to another disappear, or you don't flow up in the air or whatnot. So we are grounded in the real world, at least the physical world. So I can make a philosophical argument, and it's called what's the translation? The brain in the tank, I think, is the thing. So it's more an exercise, but it's similar to chess. It's very abstract, and you can play it, but chess doesn't solve a problem of the nuclear power plant, or it doesn't solve my an argument with my wife or anything like that. So I think reliability is often, or is pretty straightforward, if you just think about what we are already doing. So we gain empirical evidence, we are open to fallacy, and we base the strength of our beliefs, if we are rational, on the strength of our supporting evidence, but also our arguments. And the building blocks are more a formal thing. So I would compare the building blocks, for example, and this type of skill and knowledge to martial arts. So it's not that if you don't know, let's say, critical thinking, argumentation theory, and all these kind of stuff, that you can't think at all. This would be outrageous to say. It's more that it's similar to fighting, because we all can fight. If we know, okay, we need to punch or do whatever. But there's a difference between having learned the various techniques and having not learned. So if you are in the bar and everybody's drunk, it's easy to handle yourself. But you can't fight in the cage, for example. So to fight in the cage, you need technique, and the higher the level is, the higher the technique is, and therefore you need to be really, really good. So, for example, if you are a controlling engineer in a nuclear power plant, you need to be very good in system thinking, need to be way above average in critical thinking, and several other traits. And hopefully, the education of a controlling engineer is sufficient to attain those skills. But you don't need argumentation theory, for example, to, I don't know, to argue with your 3-year-old daughter why you need to brush the teeth. So typically, a very simple argument suffices. At least with my daughter, I explained my daughter that teeth get dirty at night, and it's very straightforward, and my daughter accepts this, unless she doesn't want to. But then she doesn't provide any arguments for that. She just screams, for example. So I hope I didn't lost the thread here, but yeah.
So no, I think that we've got it. I wonder. One of the criticisms I have of the Zettelkasten Lumen method and so on is that it is a great mechanism, a great framework for being productive in terms of producing output, producing papers, and so on. What I have not seen in the literature is where the method has yielded the insight that it is that if you adhere to this method, then you will divine, you will discover new insights that would have eluded you had you not engaged in this particular rigor. I suppose it's possible, but in my experience, that it's constant interrogation of what you believe is true and what you think reality is, and that there are any number of different avenues to pursue that effort. And none of them, I think, this is just my opinion, but based on what I've seen, is necessarily inherently superior to the other. This method, which I admit has a great deal of virtue, I think it feels very Western. It feels very linear. But that's the result of our culture, and so again, I just think that whatever you think you have to interrogate it all the time. It's amazing what I thought I knew 25 years ago compared to what I know now. Part of that is perhaps, dementia or just hopefully experience. But this is an interesting. We don't teach people to think critically. Human beings, we flatter ourselves that we have this tremendous cognitive capacity, but it is in fact very little. Much of what takes place in our minds is simply habituated thinking. And that thinking is actually hard, and sitting down and thinking in this manner, in a rigorous manner, is actually difficult. It takes a lot of energy, and it's difficult for people to sustain it. These are useful tools, and if people are trained in them and get some experience with them, then they can be valuable. But I think the more valuable thing is for people to understand that we don't have the cognitive capacity that we like to flatter ourselves that we believe we have. So
yeah. Let me chime in. So I can give you a very straightforward example on how the Zettelkasten method, quote unquote, gives you new insights. And it's not that the Zettelkasten does something for you, but it gives you just invitations of, and then you need to follow through and execute. So the example is the following. When my daughter was 8 months old, I was confronted with the problem of teaching her to understand the word no, because she started to play with the power plugs in the wall. So I wondered how to do it, because I wondered how do you begin? It was I mean, in the end she would have learned it, but I thought how did I teach my dog no? And I need to teach my dog like a lot of times no, because my dog is a psychopath. And I got a tip from a trainer, a trainer for service dogs for the blind. And she said the problem of dog training is that we give too much warnings. So she said there are 3 levels in communication. So green basically means you ignore, or as people we can praise. Yellow means a warning, and red means some form of correction. So in the old ages, you can like whack your dog. I don't think it's productive, but you like pull the dog away or do whatever. So something that forces the dog to change its behavior. And she says when you say no, always no to your dog, the dog learns that a no typically means that another no follows. So if the dog wants to do something really tasty, for example, eat some poop in the wood or hunt a squirrel or whatnot, a no now would compete with a stimulus. So obviously, if a no just means another no, there's no much stopping powers. And she said, skip all the no's. 1 no is enough, and then you immediately start to correct. And it was really quickly that my dog learned what no means. And I applied the same with my daughter consciously. So she played with the power plugs. I said no. My daughter continued, and then obviously I didn't punish her. I just like picked her up, and this was enough of a correction. And interestingly, we people are much smarter and faster learners with dogs. So it was like really quickly that my daughter learned no, and my parents-in-law were amazed that that my daughter, just 1 year old, understood no and actually behaved or was quote unquote obedient. And it's not exactly obedience; it's just clarity of communication that was achieved by that. So now in my Zettelkasten, I write a note. This is the color system of dog communication. I applied it to child training or raising my daughter, and then I have this note. Now I have one connection between all my notes of how to raise a child and all my notes on dog training. When I make a link, it appears in what I call a structure note. So for quickness, a structure note is just is a note that contains a lot of links. So it's made to have an entry point, an overview over a topic, or whatnot. So now I see this one note in the context of all the other notes. So all the notes of my dog training now become an invitation of how does it apply to child raising. So one striking connection to me was that dog training and child raising go in the opposite direction. The dog starts as a hyper, more independent being, just acting on its own. And then you want the dog, especially with a dog like mine, you want to make the dog hyper dependent in its decision making. So in the optimum world, the dog always look at you and ask for permission to do almost everything. I mean, not to sniff something, but before hunting a squirrel, before barking at someone, heckling someone because the person might look strange, eating something on the street or in the woods or something like that. With children, it's the opposite direction. So the children, I mean, they also start strangely independent, but you want to move them into complete independency. So not needing you for the decision. Perhaps I hope my daughter will ask me for advice because of our relationship, but you want to make the daughter or your children independent. So my question then was, if I make my daughter behave, let's say, do I run into the problem of making her obedient in a similar way that I make my dog obedient? And how to solve the problem, because I don't want my daughter to be obedient as a trait. I want her to be very independent. And this is a true spark, let's say, in my Zettelkasten. So it's not that the method gives you anything. It's kind of, this is like false promises. It's more that you are confronted with certain like proximities. So a link happens to be next to another link, or you have an idea of another node, and then you look up the node and everything is in close proximity. So the Zettelkasten is more stimulating, and you still have to make the hard work. But what the Zettelkasten can give you is some, I would say, form of environment that facilitates flow. And when you're in flow, then you are more creative in a way that you are creating and not like critically thinking, meaning removing or being this narrow.
So I think you're spot on. I think that what's in common is that you're thinking both about, training a dog and training a child, is that you're thinking about that activity, that you have a function, you have a role that you're responsible for to train your child and to train your dog, but you have different goals for your child and your dog. And certainly if you note that in your Zettelkasten, you're going to make those connections presumably sooner or later. But I think that those same connections can be made through journaling, where somebody is writing their day-to-day experiences about raising their dog or raising their children, that it is the habit of thought of those two activities in proximity to one another that will eventually make those connections for you. But if you never think about actively, and writing is thinking out loud. I mean, writing is a form of thought. I think it takes cognitive effort. I think that's where the most value is. Whether it's the Zettelkasten method seems to make it much more productive in the sense that it's easier to recall lots of supporting information or related information that may illuminate other insights. But it's the act of thinking itself and recording that thought in some method that really facilitates making those cross connections. So I think it was a great example.
I would say some, what the Zettelkasten give you is an environment that facilitates this. So let's say if you just have a journal, then you don't have, for example, a structure note. So you don't have a structured access to a topic or something like that, because it's all linear. So it can be done, but it's more difficult, I would say. So the Zettelkasten method provides you, it provides you with access, and it provides you with a specifically stimulating environment. And you're pointing to something that I try to stress when I try to explain the benefits of the Zettelkasten method, because they are not completely separate from other methods. Because one mechanism of the Zettelkasten method creating value for you is that you create a habit of writing a lot. So you have an idea, and instead of just letting it like pass by or something like that, you write it down. And when you make the Zettelkasten or integrate the Zettelkasten just into your work habits, you make it a habit to write it down. And even the act of writing down creates some value. When you then make another habit on top, making sure that you try at least to write somewhat atomic notes. So what would be just like one long text in your journal would be then like 5 different notes. Now you make it a habit to go a little bit closer to the essence. And then you structure your Zettelkasten is in a specific way. So you create access. And so this kind of like you have different lanes or different separate mechanisms on how the value is produced. And this is where I would disagree that a journal is equivalent to a Zettelkasten. I would say Tinderbox, because of the visual environment, might even more, or if you set it up correctly, it's stimulating more intensely than pure text, I would say. So possibly. So Tinderbox always, to me, it's a unicorn of an app because of its like visual and the complexity. Yeah, but set up right, it will have the stimulating effect.
And I think, and I've dominated this, and I gotta shut up, other hands are up, but sitting at a desk and writing is an environment that, a habit of thought takes place. You cannot overlook, or you should not overlook the value of getting out of that environment, like taking a walk. It's been documented how much just taking a shower stimulates thought, that not all productive thought takes place in front of the keyboard, that there are other activities and environments that can help facilitate those new connections. And I will now return to my corner and keep quiet.
So one thing I've not heard, thanks, Dave, that was an awesome dialogue and good moderation, thanks. One thing I've not heard from the process is the steps from, and so I have a process, I call it the 5 C's. It's all the same stuff. Like, yeah, as you said, this stuff has been around since the 1500s, and we've just been putting different labels on it, as people have matured. But you collect information and you cite the source. You then curate that knowledge, tag, link, put the permanent reference to it. Ideally programmed by the software, as you discussed. You then, and then because you're doing that, you then can create new knowledge because your knowledge is now unique. And then and if you're lucky, you have an opportunity to collaborate with people, at which point you can give attribution, and that collaboration can lead to more collection, creation, and curation. And then ultimately, when you're ready, you can assemble that knowledge and contribute. And that contribution can come in any number of forms. It can be verbal, much like what you've been doing today. It can be written. It could be a presentation. It could be a podcast. It could be whatever output you choose in that contribution. What I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about is your method around those kinds of stages. If you kind of agree with those steps, or if you disagree with those steps, and how you go from that collection to then ultimate output. And again, the unicorn aspect of Tinderbox, which is so often confused or scares people or puts them off, is the templating engine that Mark has produced and the action code engine that Mark has produced, that lets you actually automatically reframe your information and put it into any kind of tabular, linear, or bulleted output you want. And then produce that into a HTML or JSON or CSV or any kind of textual output that you want, even linked to images and other media files. So could you talk about that? Like, how do we go from an atomic note to a really nurtured output contribution?
So typically when you write, you try to separate writing and editing for a specific reason. There are 2 different modes, and both modes hurt each other. So you get writer's block or what else. I introduce, or with the Zettelkasten method, introduce a third phase. So first, in the Zettelkasten, you write to think. So what I'm writing in my Zettelkasten is basically geared towards clarity of my thinking, and I use the building blocks for in that case to help me, or perhaps to provide me an external reference of the clarity of my thinking. Because if I know that something is an argument but have a hard time to formalizing it, I know I didn't understand it correctly, for example. And the same goes for the other building blocks. So I work in my Zettelkasten until I have a subjective feeling of sufficient understanding of the matter I'm writing about. Then I will move to my writing app, and here I basically create some form of outline. So the outline is then the transformation of writing to think, or the transformation from writing to think to writing to communicate. Then the process is like quite, let's say, messy. So it's not like copy and paste of the notes. Sometimes I copy and paste content of notes into the manuscript. But a lot of times it's having the notes on the one side and then just writing. Very often it is that the work in the Zettelkasten creates enough knowledge on the matter that I can just write the text without the notes at the help. So the Zettelkasten method is more training my mind to be able to write the text. So for the Zettelkasten method, for Zettelkasten.de, for example, I don't use my Zettelkasten much or at all, because I'm using Zettelkasten now for 15 years. So I don't need to my Zettelkasten to figure out the Zettelkasten. I'm using the Zettelkasten to think about other stuff, like training plans and meditation philosophy, stuff like that. So here I'm just at the stage of writing. And then when you separate it, write to think and write to communicate, editing now will be cleaned up, because we all know that when we write a text and then start to edit it, we learn something new. And then we need to perhaps restructure the text because we have a completely new idea and we need to make it work. And then we need to completely change the structure of the text, stuff like that. And if we are pretty clear on the knowledge side, learning events on the editing phase happen much less. That means we can concentrate in the editing phase actually on editing for communication, for clarity, stuff like that, and focus on that. So this would be, let's say, the formal scaffolding. But I think the productivity aspect is, how to say, overblown. And I'm the perfect use case of having a fairly extensive Zettelkasten and not a lot of output, because I didn't care. Because before I met my wife, I secluded myself and didn't care about publishing at all. I occasionally did it, but I just aimed to publish my series of books that I worked on when I was 60. So I planned roughly 30 years, and then there was in the end goal was a series of books to answer the question how you can live a good life in modern times. So similar perhaps to the Nicomachean Ethics to Aristoteles. So I just sat on my computer and did all day nothing like that. So the Zettelkasten didn't help to produce anything. And I think productivity, either productivity as a publisher, let's say, or producing content. It could be presentation in the company, writing articles, books, or whatever. It comes down to just investing enough time into actually producing the thing. The question is, do you have, or the knowledge can be a limiting factor to produce the type of content that you have. And here the Zettelkasten gives you a thinking environment to actually create the substance. So in my case, for example, what would be here? Perhaps you can, where's my book? So this, for example, is my book. It's in German, but to produce or to being able or my ability to produce this work, for example, meant that I needed to work for 7 years, for example. So there's no fluff, no anecdotes, so it's not the typical book.
I'm sorry, are you sharing a screen at all, by the way, right now, or no? Oh, your book, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no fluff, there's no stories, no this kind of story-driven non-fiction thing that seems still to be trendy, and so on and so forth. So I couldn't write that. So I needed to work on the level of knowledge. So there are I don't know how many studies I read and stuff like that. So this was necessary. Same, for example, if you are a controlling engineer in the nuclear power plant, to actually write a report, you need to have worked for, or you need to have your bachelor, your master, and what else of background knowledge you need to have, and then you need to work hard to actually write a report as in that position, for example. And this is kind of might be one limiting factor, but I think for most people, the limiting factor is not the background knowledge work, but rather just sitting your butt down and write. Focus on the actual output that you want.
Okay. And what tools do you suggest for doing that kind of writing? Are you a Word person, Google Doc person?
No.
I prefer to do 90% of my work in Tinderbox when it comes to that kind of writing, but
I prefer just a very simple destruction-free writer. So AI Writer was for a long time the app of my choice, and then also Typora. Fluently, I mean, because of my coaching, I need to be familiar with like almost all apps. So I play, let's say I played even with Tinderbox and try to like understand it roughly. But let's say no, I never had a client that used Tinderbox yet. So I mean, 90% of my clients use Obsidian. And so I use like all kinds of apps. So Obsidian now, I test Obsidian as a writing app. I don't think it's a good note-taking app, but it's a fine writing app. So any simple writing app does the job for me.
Okay. All right, we'll write it about at top of time, but that doesn't mean we have to end. Does anybody else have any final comments, questions, thoughts, ideas? No? All right. Yep, Win, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Sascha. This was very helpful. And Dave, just going back to your comments, which I think are really important to note. And I suspect that one of the challenges in thinking about that Zettelkasten topic is that so much of the online discourse is make the tiny notes and magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your argument is that's not true. And I think Sascha is saying, yes, that is also not true.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that the framework, and if you go back to the way Luhmann did it originally, is implying a lot of method in creating the connections and, in a sense, making you think with and engage with the notes that exist and how they relate to each other, which is the kind of thought process you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So in the card version of this, so what Luhmann would have to do after he wrote down a bunch of cards for the day was to figure out where they were going to go in the system. These days, we can just capture a note and it just like goes into a pile, and it's easy to forget about them. But they're going into the index. He had to do this, and I'm going to make a card about that. And so there was like serious thinking that he was doing that was not just writing down the notes. And
Well, and that thinking is part of the curation process, if you will, right? You capture the note, you put it in your own words. And that was the key part for me in Lumen was you capture a note and you put it in your own words, you cite it, and that's what makes it an atomic note. If you just capture somebody else's
but
words,
a lot of discussions don't get very far behind it, beyond that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sascha.
Yeah, and again, Win, I don't know if you heard what I just said though, but I think part of Lumen's process too is you don't just capture a note. You capture a note or an idea, and what's one of the really important processes is you put it in your own words. You use your words, you use your language, and you cite it. Because one of the benefits of the Lumen process, as I learned, is when you do capture that atomic note and it is in your words, then when you do go to rediscover it or reassemble it to create your writing, a lot of your work's already done because you've already written that idea, you've already written that word, and you're not necessarily having to copy somebody else's stuff. So I think that's a really important part of the process.
Yeah, and perhaps this is a good.
And then I have one other comment I want to make before you're done. Keep going.
I want to make just mention how that Luhmann solved a very different problem that we solved. Thanks God, so I'm now one of the younger younger ones here in the round. So all of us, I guess, knew how insanely difficult it was to get a paper or an article back then, and this was the environment in which Luhmann worked. So to actually have a paper and have a footnote ending up in your article, you need to go to the library, and then you need to go through a slipbox to find the journal, then make a physical copy from the journal, because you can't rent the journal, so you can take it out because it needs to be there, so it can be it's discovered. Then you need to read it and hope that it's relevant for your work. So what Luhmann had, or what Luhmann used the Zettelkasten, for example, was that having read an article, now for him it made sense to read the article more carefully because he could then put the result of the reading in a Zettelkasten, and even if he doesn't use the article for his most recent writing project, the work can resurface, so the work wouldn't be lost. Back then, it would be lost if you can't use it for the recent article. So you take notes and you don't have any means of like resurfacing this the product of your reading. So you need to recall, and it would disappear. And when I studied history, for example, this was actually a problem that that needed to be solved. This problem of lost work. So we were taught never to read anything, but just to use it. Read highly selectively, just read barely enough so we can use the text, either a book or an article, for our text. And Luhmann used or created his Zettelkasten not as a repository of what I would say knowledge. So I wouldn't say Luhmann's notes weren't, for example, good. Very often it was just one-liners. And Luhmann was also famous for having strange footnotes. So you would look up, you read something, and then you follow the footnote, and you end up with some certificate from the 1700 of some noble in I don't know, some local kingdom or something like that. So he basically just noted the context in which he had his ideas. And also the workflow that was popularized by Sönke Aretz, for example, was just accidental, meaning it was just a byproduct of him reading in university and having a Zettelkasten at home. And the literature notes, basically the notes that he wrote and then transformed into notes in a Zettelkasten, were just like very, very brief notes. And it just makes sense in a field in which you are very, very knowledgeable. And then the result of a Zettelkasten, or the result, his Zettelkasten, was more a prompt machine. He already knew what he wanted to write when he wrote a book. So he created an outline, an extensive outline, and then he went into his Zettelkasten, and the direct translation of Kieseling, so one of his close students, was he enriched the outline. So he looked into his Zettelkasten, what kind of notes were giving something to him, and then he used this as writing prompts, and the prompt came with a reference that you can then put in his text, and then have this footnote theater that is needed to make your text look scientific. So Luhmann's Zettelkasten and his work solved a completely not completely, there's a somewhat overlap, but the problems that he solved was in a completely different environment, and the problems themselves were different, because now we kind of like drown in sources, and it's very easy to like place a footnote and have bibliographical management and all this kind of stuff. And back then it was really, really hard, and his productivity was more based on his industriousness, and the Zettelkasten was more a mechanism of like moving or connecting his reading with the footnote apparatus.
Yeah, one thing and I agree. I think that's good. I think one thing though what's coming to mind as you're talking is I believe there's an over reliance on or trust in the modern internet infrastructure that we can actually find what we want to find or refind. Hey, stop. Hey, sorry, having a dogfight here. What we want to refind easily. And studies should suggest that, over, say, a 10-year period, about 38% of the internet is lost, or it gets very difficult to rediscover. So Jenks, I can't remember his first name, spoke to us a while back too, and that's partly what he does is when he does find a source, he downloads it and makes sure that you actually never lose that original source. So I think there's an important aspect of that process. The other thing before I forget though is, and I put a link to it in the chat, when, and I don't know exactly how you put it again, where you said, yeah, and exactly, that's what Devin thinks for when. But how you said, we have some assumption that you like collect notes, magic happens, and you get an output. Mark Anderson has a common reference where he'll refer to the South Park episode of the Underpants Gnomes, where the whole episode was about fighting corporations, and the idea was the gnomes would go and steal underpants, then some magic would happen, and then out after that magic would be profit. And the whole episode was the kids in the South Park episode saying, "Yeah, but what's the middle part?" And they're like, "Magic." The corporation could never answer what the magic was. It was just take a bunch of shit and make profit. And I think what you're kind of discussing in our conversations here is the real work is in that middle part, like making that magic happen and putting, to your point, putting your butt in the chair and just doing it.
Yeah.
It actually takes a lot of effort and work.
Yeah, it's actually, I would say the Zettelkasten method could be seen as a framework to for your seriousness. So when it takes sometimes, when you like diligently process a book, it takes sometimes like 12 days or something like that. So 12 work days. But it's not, or the measurement of productivity is not the amount of books that you process. It's the amount of ideas that you can produce or reproduce, or the level or the amount of throughput of work that is possible for your sessions. And the Zettelkasten is just a facilitator for that. So there's no way around of actually typing and putting out the words. And there's no way around of using all let's say the thinking methods. So one let's say thinking method goes more into conversion, so critical thinking, system thinking, stuff like that. But also when you want to come up with solutions, you need to use divergent thinking. So Edward de Bono's tools are then for that. So you come up with more solutions, and you have checklists, and you have all the stuff that Edward de Bono, for example, then provides. The Zettelkasten is just then the framework. And the Zettelkasten, I mean, it's similar to a calculator. So it helps you a little bit, but a calculator doesn't make you, this is my through line today, it doesn't make you a controlling engineer in a nuclear power plant.
Right. Well, and again, we do need to kind of wrap up, but the one final comment I have, though, is there is a way around from doing the work, unfortunately, today, and that's an AI engine. And I'll leave you with a couple comments, and maybe we'll find you get the last word. Two things. One is I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and she was so excited on how her 8-year-old son or 8th grade son had figured out how to use AI to write his paper and then prompt it to say, "Yeah, but can you make it sound more like an 8th grader?" And just turn in the work. And so he's actually not doing the work, which then reflects to I was talking to Doug Busk, who's a former head of Coca-Cola's social media and significant thought leader in this field. And and he says the challenge with a lot of these tools today is we are using other people's words and tools like AI to actually replace direct experience. And so many people today are actually just regurgitating other people's experiences and pawning it off as their own to demonstrate their knowledge and expertise. And at the end of the day, they don't actually know anything, and they don't really understand. They're just kind of, parrots or puppets of the world. And the question is, how do we tackle that? And then my last comment is I had a horrifically bad exchange with my students this week, where the entire class just rebelled because they essentially said, "You're making us use these tools that we don't understand, and we want you to give us a 1, 2, 3, 4, give us the steps, give us the paint by number steps. And if we do those steps as you specifically dictate them, we want 100%. Right? And I'm like, but that's not the way the real world works, guys. Right? I'm going to give you step 1, maybe step 4, maybe step 10. I'm going to directionally tell you where I want to go. And then you need to sit down with the software and spend the time to figure it out." And, and I gave them some hello world assignments, and the students were like, "It took me 2 hours to get that button to work." And I'm like, yeah, that's a hello world assignment. You learned how to use the tool. And if I just prescribed it to you, you would not have actually learned anything, or you would have done it, but you would have forgotten it because you didn't struggle enough to like get that muscle memory in there. And I'm really concerned about modern kids, like the 20 somethings. They are absolutely not prepared for the workforce.
Yeah.
So basically what I've learned from my class this week is I'm absolutely horrified and I'm petrified for them. And Harvard just did an article this week too on how Harvard students are graduating without actually having the ability to function in their career because they're not talking with each other, they're not talking with the teachers, and they're not putting in the rigor or the work to actually learn something. I don't know, Wynn, Sascha, if you guys have any comments on that as a last word. But those are my kind of parting thoughts from what I'm thinking about today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree like with the sentiment more, because the Zettelkasten or the Zettelkasten, let's say the Zettelkasten practice to me is just a mental gym. So it's just time that I wrestle with ideas. It's not that I process ideas as I would be a worker in the assembly line. And this actually, the brain training that I get from it is the biggest benefit from applying the method. Because the first row is like putting the idea in your words. Then formalizing the knowledge building block would be perhaps similar to using just another translation process of the put on the idea. And the idea of what he told, I mean, I get it also all the time. Like when people try to like seek out something and they want like the specific steps. To me, it's as if people want to go to the gym, but then they want some kind of trick, and then all of a sudden they get like jacked. But to get jacked, you need to lift the weights, and you need to hurt a little bit. And if you bypass the hurt, then you don't get jacked. It's kind of like straightforward. And if you have challenges, quote unquote, challenge thinking challenges, they're not that are not challenging at all. You don't grow as a thinker, and then you don't function. I mean, it's straightforward like that. And to me, let's say the popular image of the Zettelkasten method is like that. The belief that you follow a method or you follow a specific workflow, and then some smart of result emerge. But that means that the system is the expert and not you. You didn't produce anything. If the workflow can produce the effort and you are just like one worker on the assembly line and just do this and do this and do this and this, and then all of a sudden like a complex thing like a car would work out. So you would be, if it would work like that, then the user would be redundant because the process is then smart and the user not. And this is, I think, to me, it's pretty telling that no process can be smart. Obviously, there can be good tools. I mean, it's better to have like a good toolkit to build a car than a stone and a stick. But work needs to be done.
And it's to your point earlier, where AI is pretty stupid. I mean, AI doesn't know anything. AI is a process that generates an output. And we may interpret that output as having value, but in the end of the day, its process is actually quite stupid. It's just a predictive algorithm that is spitting stuff out. It doesn't actually know anything. So that's interesting. All right. Yeah, Win, and then last Mark.
So a lot of this reminds me, like, back in the day, I used to spend in high school and in college a lot of time in the libraries with a notebook and index cards, looking up journal articles and books and writing notes out of them because that was the only way you could record things. And the Zettelkasten method, I think, scales that up, the paper version for it for a longer period of time than I was focused on. It sort of like would have been cool to sort of like start with the 10. But these days, I think it's easy to fool ourselves that surfing the web and finding something cool and flipping the page or a quote to Obsidian is the same thing. And it's not. And I think that was part of Dave's point.
Yep.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. This was awesome. Take care.